rich, rule the poor, so the borrower is servant to the lender. You want to be a servant your whole life? I don't. I don't want to be a servant my whole life. When you consider whether to take a loan, I mean, obviously there are times we do need to borrow money, right? There are certain guidelines that we should consider, biblical guidelines that we should consider. Number one, never take a loan without examining your ability to repay. Proverbs 22 verse 27 says, if you don't have the money, you might lose your bed. You might take your house. The car might go bye-bye. Taking a loan that you can handle can be enabling. Taking a loan you cannot handle becomes enslaving. Second tip, when you're considering borrowing money. If at all possible, borrow only for appreciating items, like houses, property. I would say education would be an appreciating kind of a thing. Related to this, whenever you're tempted to borrow for a depreciating item, like a car or a trip or a high-definition television, simply work harder. Whenever you're tempted to borrow for a depreciating item, simply work harder. And I call this the lesson from the ant. And it's not my idea, it's in Proverbs chapter 6. It basically says, look at the industrious nature of an ant. And if working harder isn't an option for you, then do you really need that TV? Do you really need to make that purchase? Now, earlier I indicated that Canadians have a savings problem, but it's not just that we have a savings problem. The reason we have a savings problem is we have a spending addiction. We have a spending addiction. Again, CBC Marketplace indicates that the percentage of Canadian credit card debt between 1997 and 2001 grew by 90%. That's 4 years. The average Canadian racked up 90% more on credit cards in 2001 than they did in 1997. It's just astounding. According to the Canadian Bankers Association, in 1988, there was far less than one credit card per Canadian. These stats will come up here, so I'm not going to read them all. 10 years later, in 1998, there was just over one credit card per Canadian. Last year, in 2008, there were more than 2 credit cards per Canadian. And today, the average Canadian carries 2.6 credit cards from major credit card companies. And then, this is the other reality, you add on all those store-specific credit cards like Home Depot, Future Shop, Canadian Tire, and the number of credit cards Canadians carry today is 9. 9 credit cards. One of the best-selling books of all time is entitled The Purpose-Driven Life. I'm sure all of you have heard of it. You've seen it at Costco. Many of you have probably read it, The Purpose-Driven Life. And it was Pastor Rick Warren's attempt to illustrate what a life well lived would look like. If Rick Warren were going to write a book that actually portrayed how North Americans are living their lives, I think his book would be titled The Purchase-Driven Life. The Purchase-Driven Life. Because that's how we're living. So be careful what you borrow. Number 4, be careful about lending money. The Bible raises a number of red flags when it comes to lending money to others. And it's dealing with it more in the context of personal lending. So, lending money to a friend or a family member or a neighbor. Now, it doesn't mean that you should never do that. In fact, Matthew 5 verse 42 seems to suggest that if you're a follower of Christ, you need to be very quick to lend items that other people need. And I would think that by way of extension, it would also include finances when there's a need. But know this, lending to a friend, a family member, or a neighbor may test your relationship beyond its ability to endure. Because it's a fact, lending is a sticky business. Banks do it professionally, which means that if a person comes to you for a loan, they've probably been turned down by the professionals. And the reason banks turn people down is because they consider them too high a risk. And if the bank considers them too high a risk and they do this professionally and you do it personally, chances are you're going to get burned or hurt, or the relationship won't endure. Something has a high probability of going wrong. So here's my advice to you about lending to people you know. When I come to you for a loan, this is the advice. Don't lend to someone you know personally more than your amount to just wash it away. All right? When you lend to a family member, a friend, or a neighbor, you hope that they will pay you the agreed upon amount in the agreed upon time. But if they don't, you better be able to wash your hands of it. All right? That's a good principle to stick by. Don't assume they're going to pay. You hope they're going to pay. But if you're lending them more, then you're going to be like bitter and angry and going to court and hating them for the rest of your life, then you're lending them too much. So be careful about lending. Number 5. How you handle, how we handle, how I handle money indicates to God how I handle more important things. And believe it or not, there are more important things than money, like leadership in the church. One of the requisites, the prerequisites of being a leader in the church is that you are able to manage your finances well, your personal finances well. 1 Timothy 3, verses 3 through 5 and verse 12 make this clear. It's a litmus test for Christian leadership. Sound financial management is one of the marks of a solid Christian lifestyle. Mature Christians manage their personal wealth well. It doesn't make them better, but I think it's something we all need to strive for and aspire for. Second thing that's more important than money, I think, would be spiritual gifts and big kingdom assignments. Listen to what Jesus says in Luke 16, verse 11. And if you are untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? So in other words, if you consider yourself a Christian, I think that you would prefer bigger assignments. Right? You go fishing, you want to catch bigger fish. If you're going to be a disciple anyway, you might as well hope for and put yourself in a position for exciting and high-stakes kingdom assignments from God. Well, in order to receive those higher stakes, more exciting assignments, we need to manage our wealth better, Jesus says. Or those assignments, those spiritual gifts, they're going to go to someone else who does. Because God is watching how we navigate our personal finances. And there's nothing wrong, hear me, there's nothing wrong with being a water boy on the sidelines, providing water for the players out on the field in God's great plan of salvation. All right? People need a drink once in a while. However, if given the opportunity, wouldn't you want to be on the field annihilating the opposition? If given the choice, wouldn't you want to have a few quarterback sacks under your belt? If given the chance, wouldn't you want to be playing in the Super Bowl of all Super Bowls? Because I certainly would. And the test for that, according to God, is, or one of the tests is how we manage our money. Number 6. Once your needs are met, you have an obligation to help those who are poor and needy, who will always be with us. And I'm not going to spend much time on this because we're going to revisit that in week 3, but for now I'm just going to say the world says hold on to as much of your money as possible, but God's Word says that God blesses those who freely give their money to those who are in genuine need. And if you don't believe me, you can read Proverbs 19, verse 17 on your own. And then the last one. Money itself is not the end. Money itself is not the end. And this one is huge, and it runs completely counter to our culture. Despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, most people in our culture still live like they believe that true and lasting happiness is found in money. Acclaimed playwright George Bernard Shaw once said, "Money is indeed the most important thing in the world." Poet Gertrude Stein was fond of saying, "Whoever said money can't buy happiness obviously didn't know where to shop." But God's Word says that while money may be important, it's not the most important. And when we view money as the ultimate in our lives, then awful stuff happens. 3 examples.